So, we did a live stream earlier today for members only talking about this speech that Christopher Waller was giving, talking about the neutral interest rate. And it was a really good live stream. So, if you are not a member of the channel, that's okay. You can go down to the link. You can find a link to the speech. You can go ahead and read through it yourself. And if you want to understand a little bit more in depth about that speech, then you can join in the channel for $1 a month. It is a very small price to pay to get a better understanding of it. Now, I found this speech to be pretty interesting considering the neutral interest rate and how that impacts the Federal Reserve's monetary policy making decisions. And now, if you've been following this channel for any length of time, I mean, we have talked about how the monetary policy is so different from what anybody in the mainstream media, all the economists out there, even a lot of the other YouTubers out there just don't seem to understand it to, I don't know, maybe to the level that I do, or at least to what is that the Federal Reserve is saying their monetary policy is. Now, when you listen to them out there on the mainstream media, it is so different. Like they don't talk the same way. They do use a lot of the same phrases and words and kind of similarities, but it's not the same meaning than when you go and you listen to a lot of the stuff that they are saying to each other, especially when it comes to these speeches. Now, here's the important thing to really understand about the neutral interest rate. The neutral interest rate is the rate that is neither accommodating nor restricting the economy. It is neutral. This is when the Federal Reserve is like at perfect, like perfectness. There is no such thing, but if there was, that would be it, right? So the problem with the neutral interest rate is that it has dropped to a very, very low number. Right now, nobody knows exactly what this neutral interest rate is. And it just seems kind of like far-fetched that there would even be a neutral interest rate or that there would even be discussions of it, since there is no way of figuring out really where it is or what it is at a current moment. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. There is a neutral interest rate out there. And the problem with it is that it's low, really low. And now dropping the Fed funds rate far enough below that neutral interest rate to stimulate the economy is no longer an effective tool. There's just not enough room before hitting the lower bound of zero. So when you hear all the talk out there about how dropping interest rates is like the next Fed's move in order to like stimulate the economy, doesn't matter, right? There is no position at the Federal Reserve with the Fed funds level other than zero where they will have a stimulative monetary policy, because they would have to drop it far enough below neutral to actually stimulate the economy, and it's not there. There is no position for them to do that. The longer time goes on, right? As longer the time goes on of elevated interest rates, the farther it will begin to pull the neutral interest rate up. So it will take higher for longer for a significant amount of time in order to raise the neutral interest rate significantly in order for it to become an effective tool for the Federal Reserve to drop interest rates. This is very important to understand. Now, I'm going to share with you the 5 factors that has played in to the dropping of neutral interest rates and the reasons they are so low. And the main reason is the U.S. Treasuries. It's the heightened demand for U.S. Treasuries. Remember, this is actually something that John Williams was talking about in his speech for monetary policy in a low neutral interest rate world. Excuse me, in a low neutral interest rate world. And that speech was given November of 2018, long before, well, not long, but before COVID and inflation and all the other stuff that was happening. They knew that they were going to have to change the way that they were conducting themselves, and inflation absolutely saved the Federal Reserve. Now, I'm going to share these 5 factors with you. And again, this is the reasonings that the neutral interest rate has come down to a very low level. And it mainly has to do with the heightened demand for assets, right? The first factor is the liberalization and the globalization of capital markets starting in the 1990s. This increased the global demand for safe and liquid assets to investors around the world who previously did not have access to U.S. treasuries. You hear that? So back in the 90s, the liberalization and the globalization of capital markets starting in the 90s. And this is what created a heightened demand for these safe and liquid assets to investors that weren't normally there. So all of a sudden, right, in the 90s, well, it wasn't all of a sudden, but in the 90s, it started happening and grew exponentially. I would assume that, if you were to look at the numbers back then to the way they are now, it would be far higher. Probably should have found those out before I started doing this, but, anyway. According to the speech, that was one of the first factors in the reasonings for that heightened demand was that globalization and liberalization. I love the way they use that for the capital markets. The second factor causing demands for treasury securities to grow more than supply was a large buildup of official reserves that started after the reforms followed in the 1998 financial crisis in Asia. One of the consequences of removing capital controls and other financial market liberalizations in other countries over the past 30 years has been to make foreign governments more vulnerable to sudden capital outflows and financial crises. Many countries have responded by building up their foreign exchange reserves to help weather such stresses. Global foreign exchange reserves have increased from around 1 trillion to nearly 12 trillion today. And that was in the early 90s to now. So all these people who were typically experiencing these capital outflows and other consequences from having these issues within the financial system that happened, what was it? In 1998, the crisis in Asia, right? So they started hoarding up on using a lot more treasuries. What was the third one? Oh, here we go. The third factor driving prices up and yields down and similar affecting the R star was the sovereign wealth funds, right? The sovereign wealth funds. In addition to foreign exchange reserve holdings, sovereign wealth funds for some economies, especially those rich in natural resources, have become an increasingly important way for governments to invest abroad and diversify their national wealth. They are an increasingly significant force in global financial markets. Although sovereign wealth funds are diverse in their holdings, U.S. government debt is typically a sizable share of these funds. So again, this is where a lot of these treasuries are ending up, right? See, everybody says, oh, it's the Federal Reserve. Well, yeah, the Federal Reserve has a huge issue, right? When they go to buy treasuries, that's the only way that they can stimulate the economy. Dropping of interest rates doesn't work. And the problem with doing that for stimulating the economy is the heightened demand that's already existing around the world for it. It doesn't make it really an effective tool anymore. This is one of the problems that I think they're trying to explain here to us, but they're just not saying it in so many words. The fourth factor that is thought to have influenced treasury yields in R star over the past couple of decades is the aging population in the United States and around the world. The argument here is that as people move past their prime working years, their demand increases for safe, liquid investments that ensure their principal and preserved their needs in retirement. So this is where they do not want to take on risk. They're worried about it, right? And this is the older population, not only here in the United States, but all over the place, right? And they're like, man, I don't trust anybody else but the United States treasuries. And although most of us are looking at it going like, hey, man, do you see all these people around the world who are dumping treasuries and doing all this other stuff? That's not me. I don't look at it like that. But what I'm saying is you see a lot of news articles like that. It puts the concern into like a lot of people is like, do people really want these treasuries? Yeah, all these retired people, there is no other place to go. Treasuries are it. It's the safest liquid, guaranteed to pay, no chance of default, and there's no other place that an old person is really willing to take on that kind of risk unless they are a risk taker. Okay, moving on. The fifth factor that increased the demand for treasuries came from many new financial regulations implemented after 2008 global financial crisis. Regulators in the United States and abroad increasingly wanted banks to hold safer and more liquid assets as part of their balance sheet. Again, right? You think about it, these banks who were typically in risk, taking on loan or loaning out money to people who may have been a higher risk in government debt. After the great financial crisis, the regulations, because of the deterioration within the banking system, the new regulations came in and said, hey, if you're going to hold a bunch of assets on your balance sheet, you better make sure that they're liquidable, right? And the only thing that you can really guarantee that are going to be a liquid asset is going to be treasuries. Nothing else is as liquidable as that. It is as close to cash as you could possibly get without being cash is a U.S. Treasury. And now these 5 reasons right here, right? The heightened demand after the global financial crisis within the banking system, the aging population wanting, basically needing it for retirement funds, the sovereign wealth funds from around the world who are looking for a safe place to also put their their holdings, their funds. They are finding it into U.S. Treasuries. Let me get up here. The second one was, after the follow-up of the 1998 financial crisis in Asia, right? The consequences of capital controls and other financial market liberalizations. And then that first one was the liberalization of globalization of capital markets starting in the early 90s. That increased in the demand for safe and liquid assets around the world. So that right there, right? All this huge demand for U.S. Treasuries is the reason that the interest rates had fallen as far as they did. Now, yes, we can blame the Federal Reserve and all kinds of stuff for their manipulation tactics within the financial markets, and I do agree. Believe me, look, I got my End the Fed hat on, so yes, let's end the Fed. Okay. Now that we have said that, we have to really understand what was taking place that was driving this whole interest rate yields too low, right? What was doing it was the heightened demand for these safe and liquid assets. This is what they are talking about, right? All these factors. When this happens, it starts driving that neutral interest rate down. Think about it right now. All the stuff that's being talked about, as far as what's coming from the mainstream media about how there's possible recessions and all this other stuff, and it's all talk about when the Federal Reserve is going to be lowering rates. If they were to lower rates right now, okay, there is not enough room. The interest rates have not been significantly risen enough to raise the neutral interest rate enough. Now, it may have risen. It may not have. Time will tell. But the fact is that even if it has risen, it's not risen much, right? And we can tell that by the 10-year Treasury. The 10-year Treasury is a proxy, so they say, for the neutral interest rate. Now, you have to take into consideration the yield of the 10-year Treasury and the inflation expectation, right, that would produce the real yield that comes from this 10-year Treasury. Is the inflation, is what it says it is the inflation expectation different from the actual inflation that is occurring? These are questions that I always ask of it because I don't necessarily believe the inflation numbers, nor do I believe the CPI numbers or the Federal Reserve numbers or anything else that is being stated out there. But I do understand that there is a position in which that the Federal Reserve could be holding neutral or holding the Fed funds rate in relation to a neutral interest rate that nobody knows exactly where it's at. And the fact that they are keeping interest rates elevated is proof enough to me that they are doing something that is an attempt to try and raise that neutral interest rate. The longer they keep interest rates elevated, the higher the neutral interest rate will go. Now, again, how much it moves, by how much, how far, is anybody's guess. But the idea of lowering interest rates to stimulate the economy isn't possible. It's like it's not even a possibility. It's not even in the realms of possibilities. Unless you went into negative interest rates. The only way to stimulate the economy is to take interest rates to zero, drop it back down to the lower bound, which won't be an effective tool for actually stimulating the economy, but it will put the government in a position in which that they can go back into massive stimulative spending. And that's what it would take. And this is what we should expect if there is to be a downturn coming to the economy. Now, they don't talk about how the economy has already been pre-bailed out. They don't talk about how the unemployment is not rising significantly. They're not talking, well, they do talk about it, but they're not talking about it in relation to the monetary policy in the mainstream media. See, that's the problem that most people are not seeing, is that if the unemployment stays significant or stays low, I don't even have to be significant, if this just stays low, the unemployment stays low, then there is no reason for the Federal Reserve to alter course. They're mandated to do two things: low and stable prices and full employment. If the employment is full, then they're mandated to get the prices stable. That means they will keep interest rates elevated until that happens. So until unemployment rises, there is no reason for the Federal Reserve to alter course. And even if they did, they would have to drop it significantly below the neutral interest rate, which won't take place unless the interest rates stay elevated for a significant amount of time. So just understand that that's what's the case. This is coming directly from the people who vote on monetary policy. Now, it is just one dude's opinion, but it's a very valid opinion, in my opinion. Right? This is the same things that I have been saying too for a very long time. And it's, once you understand it, once you see what it is that once you understand that the Federal Reserve had pretty much knew over 20 years ago that they were going to come into a situation in which that their monetary policy was going to end. There was going to be no more monetary policy for them to then conduct themselves in order to deal with downturns in the economy. It was coming to an end. They knew it. They knew long before it happened. And so, understanding that they knew that this situation was going to come, they had to come up with other ideas, tools, concepts. I don't even know how to describe it. Unusual tools or something of that nature, right? These are things that typically would not be in the ideas of most economists or strategists out there as far as what it is that the Federal Reserve would be doing, because they are so unorthodox to the concepts. And mainly it's a lot of verbiage, right? The way that they use their words, how they conduct themselves out there in the mainstream media, how they are giving the people perception or allowing people's perception to exist when it's not the truth or the reality. I think that's probably more it. See, the way the Fed used to conduct themselves is so different from the way it is today that when people are saying the Fed is going to do this, that, and the other thing, they're thinking in the way that they are expecting from their past. It's not the same anymore. Once you hear their words, once you look through and you find how flexible average inflation targeting is a brand new concept, never once ever taken place within the monetary policy like we had ever experienced. And this happened, this change took place August 27th of 2020. Nobody knows. Literally nobody knows. It's so funny. I try to find other people explaining flexible average inflation targeting the way that I have gone through and looked through all the documents, showing and reiterating them constantly, bringing out the propaganda from the mainstream media and showing how they are explaining the 2% target in an inappropriate fashion, since the Federal Reserve does not do this, does not go for a 2% target. And having the understanding that this is the way that they are able to conduct themselves without being able to adjust monetary policy, with not having to adjust interest rates. It is I understand for most people it is probably some, I don't even know how to explain it. It's probably thinking that they're telling lies or stories or something like that. It's not, man. what they did is they had to come up with a way. They were like sitting back there like, okay, listen, man, we are going to run into the lower bound of zero with interest rates, meaning that we are not going to be able to stimulate the economy. The lower bound is coming, right? We are dropping interest rates right to the lower bound. It's going to happen. So if you know that it's coming and that the dropping of interest rates will not get people out there borrowing money to buy houses and cars and go on vacation, if you know this is coming way, way in advance, you're going to sit there with your buddies and conceive of ways of getting people to be able to spend money or move money within the economy that was unlike anything that you had ever experienced or had to deal with in the past. And mainly it was about perception. It was all about the way that people were thinking and feeling. If they think that inflation is going to kill them, then they will go out there and behave in a way that will actually cause inflation to happen. And this is really what Ben Bernanke was doing when it came to the quantitative easing of 1, 2, 3, and 4. Like, I was one of them who was up there, was just like, holy crap, this is going to create a hyperinflation scenario. I dumped all my money into silver and was convinced that the dollar was going to fail. They just took their balance sheet from $850 billion to $4.5 trillion. That was over a quadrupling of the balance sheet. Like, this last round of quantitative easing doubled the balance sheet. What we were experiencing during the great financial crisis was 4 times worse. Right? 4 times worse. And it failed to produce the inflationary scenario that the Federal Reserve was looking for. I had to give up on the money printer, go burr, causes inflation. It doesn't work like that. Right? And so now understanding the Federal Reserve in a different fashion is that they are going through a psychological game right now because their monetary policy of dropping of interest rates to try and stimulate the economy doesn't do it. It works on the one side, right, where they can actually restrict the economy in a lot of ways, and in cases you're going to find that even the raising of interest rates doesn't really restrict the economy right now because it's proven itself wrong, right? The economy is not restricting it enough. Like, they're thinking about raising rates even more. And so now understanding that, like, this rate policy adjustment thing doesn't seem to work. Like, they raised rates, failed, right? They're like, oh, they lost control of inflation. No, it's because rate adjustments is the failure in itself, right? They already knew that wasn't going to work anymore. And that's why it's so important to have control over the narrative of where it is that interest rates are going to go and making sure that people are focused in on that and nothing else. Like, what is it that the Federal Reserve is going to do with interest rates? If they can look at that and nothing else, then the Federal Reserve can still hold their control. And since nobody understands anything about flexible average inflation targeting or anything else that the Federal Reserve is doing with their monetary policy, that is what everybody is focused in on. And they have total control over it. You can see it right now. I mean, just look at every single mainstream media article out there, and probably most YouTubers out there as well, or anybody else who's like an online economist. They're all probably saying the same thing. Looking for this 2% target to adjust interest rates is absolutely just the most delusional thing in the entire world. And it's got the entire world wrapped up in that idea. And it's sad. It's like, I actually feel really fortunate for this channel for giving me the drive to dive into as much research into the Federal Reserve's policies, their speeches, their ideas, dating back as far as it has, in order to come up with their strategy, to know it as well as I do. And I'm not trying to brag or anything, because I'm not bragging. I'm just showing you exactly this is what they are saying. This isn't my assumptions. This isn't my conspiracy theories. This isn't anything like that. This is their own words, right? I figured out how to decipher it in a way that I can explain it now, right? Because most of the time when you read through this stuff, they communicate it in such a way that is so confusing that even people who are economists don't understand it. All right, I think I've gone off long enough. It was half an hour or something here. Let's read through some comments here. All right, I'm gonna thank you for hitting the like button too, guys. If you we got 388 people watching with 103 likes. Go hit the like button, and the algorithm will spread the video around for more people to join in. I want to keep spreading this information. I want to make sure that we keep breaking it down to understand exactly what it is that the Federal Reserve is up to. because this is not a game here. Like this is real life. And they are screwing with the minds of the people out there. They got this mass mind psyops thing going on, and I don't know how to prove it any more than what I have. But if we keep breaking it down, I think it's going to become so obvious to most people, who at least the people who are following this channel, that they will be able to spread this information out there, and they will no longer be able to play this game. And then we can truly end the Fed, right? Like, you're not going to end the Fed fighting them. It's not going to work. You got to understand what it is that they are doing, so that then you can position yourself in a way that then makes them irrelevant. And that's the point. Like, you can't vote them away. You just literally have to exclude them out of your existence. And the only way to do it is to know what they're doing, right? Is to understand it. Whew. Okay, guys. Let's go on here. I'm sorry you believe so much in yourself. Are you talking to me? Yeah, I don't believe in anything but myself. Yeah. Great info. Thank you. Yeah, well, thank you. Out of time, 247. I appreciate it. I paid $2 per liter for gas this morning. Felt like Bozo the clown leaving the pump after, but what can you do? Nobody with money listens to you, bro. Okay. Hey, Dillard, I get it, man. You don't have to be here, man. I mean, go away. And, that's not true. See, Dillard, you don't understand, man. I don't even know why I'm talking to you, man, but this is okay. This is actually a good point that I want to make to people, is that the ignorance that comes from a lot of individuals out there who think that just because I'm sitting in a 99 Ford Explorer that nobody listens to me. Do you realize that a couple of years ago, I stood on stage with the likes of guys like Ron Paul, spoke to the same audience, to the same group of people, and I'm about ready to go on stage here in a week to go speak to 800 people, I'm guessing, hundreds of millionaires to regular old folks who are all going to be at the Rebel Capitalist. And I'm going to get up there and I'm going to speak this same jargon to them. So don't tell me that nobody listens to me, man. I mean, I've already done so much stuff, man. I don't need to tell you what I've done, All right, moving on. Love your vids. All right, go away, but get the thumbs up first. Yeah, I appreciate that. That's okay. I'm not going to read any more of his comments. He can cruise. All right, so when will the Fed cut rates? Unemployment needs to get higher. Okay, think about it. Who is that? I just want to make sure it ain't whatever his name is. What is his name? Okay. I just don't want to answer any of his questions. When will the Fed cut rates? Just think about it like this for just a second. The question in itself at the very beginning. So when will the Fed cut rates? It doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. That's not what you want to be thinking, right? Because it's not a matter of the Fed cutting rates. Even if the Fed cut rates, it doesn't do anything, because the cutting of interest rates is no longer an effective tool. So don't worry about when the Fed cuts rates. That's not the question you want to be asking, right? In fact, that shouldn't even be in the lineup of questions, right? Unemployment needs to get higher. Yes, that is when the Federal Reserve will cut rates. But again, it doesn't make any difference. That's not the effective tool. The effective tool is talking about cutting interest rates. What it is that they are going to communicate to the people out there, is it going to be open-ended or closed-ended when it comes to the interest rate cutting? Because whatever it is that the markets believe, the narrative that is put out there, will then start to move the markets in a way as if they conducted their interest rate cuts. It is very important to understand it from that fashion, because that is the monetary policy, not the interest rate cuts, but the idea of it. Think about what happened. Think about it. The Federal Reserve has not done anything for like months, like almost a year. How long has it been since they've topped out on interest rates? Almost a year, right? I don't even know how long now. And 6 months ago, there was a dot plot that convinced everybody that there was going to be, 7 interest rate cuts this year. That narrative, that idea, that media push sent interest rates plummeting in the mortgages right away. There was huge drops taking place. Mass people went out there and started taking out mortgages. Now, when I say that, it's because there was no change to the Fed's policy. None. But there was a huge boost within the mortgage markets, within the house buying communities out there. So now it was very short-lived, as the people recognized right away that this was a credible threat. As time went on, they realized, oh, inflation's running hot, can't cut rates, may have to raise rates, right? It quickly made that whole little housing, boom that started to be short-lived. Now, if the narrative had continued, if the push in the media was that the plot map is a set in stone policy that is guaranteed to definitely, get interest rates to drop into the future, then you probably would have seen more activity within the housing market. Fed still wouldn't have had to do anything, right? They could have just been sitting there going, yeah, plot map, plot thing. Yeah, 7, sure. Keep telling them that, I mean, it doesn't, to me, like, I make fun of that stuff because it doesn't, that's a communication tool that they developed back when they were trying to establish credible threats, trying to figure out how it was that they were going to communicate to the public some of their interest rate setting policy ideas in order to get the markets to behave in a way so that they wouldn't have to cut interest rates. That dot plot was part of that communication tool. It's not real. That's very important to understand. And so again, with the question within itself, when is the Fed going to cut rates? Doesn't matter. Don't ask that question. That's not the question you should be asking. Right? In fact, it's not even in the realms of questions, because it doesn't matter, even if they were to cut rates. So that's like the important thing to remember. So when somebody says they're going to cut, when are they going to cut rates? You think, what difference does that make? It's the communication of what it is that they're going to do about it. That's the important part. Right? You didn't cut your, well, no. Okay, moving on down here to the bottom. 442 people watching. Nice. Go hit the like button. 147 likes. Ask any question you like. Let me dive into whatever concepts, topic, re-clarify, reiterate, whatever it is that you need. Let's break this stuff down, Save them. I saved them, Orange Jesus. Yeah, I don't mean to make fun of old, like, I don't want to say anything negative or bad about Trump, right? Although I have in the past, I said some stuff that was, would seem like I'm not a fan, which, as for president, I really don't care. But something I found very interesting is he went to a libertarian convention and got booze and, like, basically was not looked at in an approving fashion. And this is something that I'm more of a libertarian than I am anything. Actually, I'm more of an anarchist, so I don't even care about government. So, but if there was any kind of political affiliation that I would move towards, it would definitely be libertarians. Right? That's the direction I would go. And I find it very interesting that the true-hearted American libertarians did not see Trump favorably. Those who are in favor of Trump should ask why. Like, why is that? Okay? Because I think that's very important to understand, because I was never a fan of him, and and it's probably because of my libertarian mindset that was that reason. And so, anyhow, moving on. And I don't think any politician could possibly save this. There is nothing, like, if somebody comes in and says, hey, man, we can make things better, it was like, well, you might alleviate the pain for a little while, but it's not going to do anything for my kids. It's going to be just as bad for them, if not worse, because we're actually postponing the pain till we get it to them. I'd rather take the hit today. So don't tell me that you can make it better. Tell me you can make it worse to make my kids' life better, right? Because that's really what needs to happen. And I don't even think that if you made my life worse and my kids' life worse, that it would make it better for the future generations even after that. Because I understand what it is that created the situation we are now in, and to make it better is a bad idea when it comes to, unless you like living in poverty and misery, then I guess it isn't so bad. You know, it would be a good idea. But it's better to understand we are in a bad situation here, and it's not going to be easily remedied. All right, gold and silver prices go up or down. Oh, I see. Simon will also be in Florida next week, and yes, I will. Stay curious. I will be. All right. Trump opposes CBDC, and I don't. It doesn't matter because I don't think CBDC is even going to mean anything. I think that's a ploy to get people's minds off of the idea that they are about ready to lose their cash. I think that's literally a ploy. I think Donald Trump is playing a game with the minds of the American people to get them thrown off the course, right? Throw their view off, right? Whatever. This is the handshake gut punch that's about ready to take place. That's what's going on here. See, if you are convinced that Donald Trump doesn't even agree with central bank digital currencies, and then Senate goes out there and says, hey, we're going to ban central bank digital currencies from ever existing here in the nation without congressional approval, blah, 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 right? And everybody is just like, all right, no digital currencies for us. Right? Meanwhile, in the background, stable coins are just running rampant. And they're talking about regulation of stable coins. Well, guess what? Your currency just got tokenized. Didn't even realize it happened. They're going out there talking about how they're banning the idea of it. Yeah, it's taking place. You know, okay, whatever, you know. So go ahead and this, you know, this is the thing, man. Don't piss down my back and tell me it's raining. Like, I can see it. I can see it taking place. Don't, like, you know, you can't tell me that, like, I mean, that's why I find this so frustrating when it comes to, like, looking at politics. That's why I don't do it. It's because I can see it so plainly that they're doing just that. We need Rand Paul to throw his name in the hat for the third party alternative. Hey, we all lose some way. Okay. Aloha from Hawaii. Hey, financial firefighter. All right, the sun will go nova and our poles will flip soon. Get prepared. All right, Mr. Horology, preach. All right. Interest rates are about average right now with low unemployment. Okay. All right. It would be nice if you release an audiobook of your reading the Cantillon essay. I would buy. Oh no, that's interesting. Like do like almost like a voiceover kind of thing, right? Read the audio, read the book, and then sell the audio of it. How do I do that? Is that legal? How do I legally do that? All right. Oh, hey, I got a super chat. Let's go check that out. All right. Brody says, "Hey Simon, how would loans work if the Fed had negative rates in place?" It's hard to say. Like I'm going to assume something here when it comes to the negative interest rates because I don't think they could actually work, right? So if we were to have a negative interest rates, and let's say like a negative interest rate on anything out there, like a house, right? Well, if you bought a house and it had a negative interest rate attached to it, say you bought a house for $100,000 and it had a negative interest rate to it, just the idea of a negative rate would mean that by the time that you had paid for the house, you will have paid less than what the purchasing price would have been, like the actual tag price. Because you took out a loan and it has a negative rate, a $100,000 loan means that you pay back $98,000, right? Like, how does that work? Well, nobody in the world would sell loans then, like, because nobody would buy one. That is like, how does like this doesn't make any sense, right? And nobody's going to loan money out like that. So how does a negative interest rate even possibly work when it comes to like a house loan. Like you can't take out, like maybe you can charge $115,000 for the house, and then by the time you pay the negative rate, it will be like, $100,000 or something, for the house. Like you got to come up with these weird ideas on how to deal with this negative rate. And that becomes like, no, like, how do I do that? Like, I need to make money if I'm going to loan money out. I don't want to lose money by loaning money out. So, like, how does this work for the lender? It doesn't work for the lender at all, like, in any sense. So, how do we even have negative rates to begin with? Like, we've experienced negative rates here, like, even for a short-lived time, there was a negative interest rate on like a 1-month treasury, right? It dropped below zero for just a short time. And in other nations, it was, below negative or below zero quite significantly. And so people might ask that question. It's just like, well, wait a minute, there was negative interest rates in these other nations. How does that occur, right? How does this occur that you can have a negative interest rate in this other nation and then say, like, can it really even exist, right? So here's the thing. Let me try and do it like this. Let me grab a piece of paper if I can here. My favorite speech, Monetary Policy for a Low Neutral Interest Rate World. If you get a chance, go read this speech, right? November 30th, 2018. Read that speech. That's incredibly, incredibly important speech. Here we go. Piece of paper. Bang. We're going to do this. And people love it when I do this explanation. You're going to like it too. Okay. So here we go. We're going to talk about the bond market real quick and how it is that a bond can actually go negative, right? How it is that you can have negative yielding bonds out there. Okay? Because it doesn't make any sense to have a negative interest rates when lending money out there is going to have a negative return, meaning that you lend out $100 and you get $80 back. Doesn't make sense, right? Nobody would do it. Now, let's just understand a bond for what it is for just a minute. Now, a bond is a loan. That's it, right? It's a loan just like any other loan, right? So typically, you're going to understand like a bond as having $100 face value. So let's just assume here we have this $100 face value bond, right? $100, easy to know, right? This is due in 10 years. So 10 years from today's date, right? 10 years from now, this bond is going to be worth $100 face value. Okay? But you got to wait 10 years to get it. Now, in the meantime, there's going to be an interest payment that is made, just like any other loan. If you have a house loan, a car loan, any other kind of loan, you got to make an interest payment or even a principal payment that goes with it. In the bond situation here, it's going to be an interest payment. And in the case of this 10-year bond, there's going to be 10 payments because it's going to make one payment a year, right? So if we kind of designate this thing into 10 little spots, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. One little one way off here, off to the corner of the paper, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yes. Okay. So now at the bottom of here, what you'll be considered are coupons. Okay. Now these coupons, and I'm going to write 10% in each one of these right here. Okay. Those are the 10% interest payments that this bond will pay. So once a year, you can go down there and you can take this little coupon and you rip it off like that, and you go down and you say, hey, I want my interest payment for this particular bond. Okay. So that's how this bond works. Once all the coupon payments have been made, it'll be at the end of the 10 years. You take your bond in and you cash it for your face value of $100. Okay. That is it. That is the bond. That is the simplest understanding of it. There is no more other confusion or any other aspects of it. That is it. Okay. Now, there are certain things that can now take place with this bond, right? And now mainly, if I can get it out of here, here we go. Okay. Mainly, what I can do with it is I can hold it and get these interest payments off of it. However, I could also sell it. Okay? Because it doesn't necessarily mean that I have to hold it for the entire duration of it. Now, let's just assume for just a second, right, that I have just purchased this bond. It has all the payments attached to it. It's $100 face value, and it has a 10% coupon to it. And I'm looking at my bond right here that I just bought. Right? This thing is going to have a 10% yield. It has a 10% yield because it has these 10% coupons. I paid $100 for it, which means that I get 10% interest on a $100 face value bond that I paid $100 for. Now, if I paid a little bit more than $100 for it, I would still get this 10% interest payment off of it. And if I held it to maturity, I would get all those 10% payments off of it, and I could cash it in for the $100 face value. But my initial investment, paying slightly over $100 for it, means that my total return is actually slightly less than if I had just paid $100 for it. Does that make sense? So like my end result from holding the bond, from paying a slightly higher price than $100, means that the total yield that I would receive has fallen because the price had risen. You guys got that? That right there is probably one of the hardest things for most people to understand about the bond market. Nothing here changes. Nothing on this bond changes. It is going to be the same no matter what, no matter who owns it. It is going to pay 10% coupons for the face value. So in this case, it would be like $10 for every coupon, no matter who owns it, no matter how much they paid for it, right? It's always going to do that. At the end of 10 years, it'll pay the face value, no matter who owns it or pays for it, no matter how much they paid for it. However, the end result for the investor on how much they paid for it in the beginning, or when they initially got it, the yield then may be different depending on what the interest rates are at the time. Okay, so this thing may not sell for $100. It may sell for $110. Right? It may sell for $120. As the price of this goes up, the yield goes down. It can get to the point that the demand for these becomes so high that even with the interest payment and the principal payment, it will not be positive, but actually negative. There has been cases in which that people would pay more for the bond than what it would pay in interest payments and face value. The bond had gone negative. Even though face value and interest payments, the coupon payments are all positive, what the investor is paying for it means that what they are going to yield has gone negative. And that's where negative interest rates come from. So now somebody might ask, this is still, again, why would anybody buy the bond knowing that they were going to get a negative interest rate, right? Knowing that by the time that they got paid back for all of it, they would have less money, less capital, like literally less money than when they had purchased it. Or, yeah, than if they had just held the money, right? Here's the thing. Once you start buying a bond with a low yield, what you are anticipating is that the yields are going to fall further down and the price is going to rise and you'd be able to sell that bond for a profit. It is a speculation in the market. So when you hear about how governments or whatever are going to go into quantitative easing, buy into the government debt, the sovereign debt, and force yields into negative territory, what they are doing is paying an overprice for these things. And because the people, the market out there sees the government doing it, they attempt to front run the government by buying into those bonds as well, which only causes the problem to grow worse, and down yields go. This can flood into not only into treasury markets, so like in the cases of European nations or whatever out there, but it can also go into mortgage markets like we had experienced, or not we, but Denmark had experienced with their adjustable interest rate mortgages. And the same thing, the demand for mortgage debt was so high, like the people's speculation that the buy into mortgages or the buy into mortgage debt was so prevalent out there that it literally became speculation, and people were forcing the rates into negative territory, thinking that if they bought this bond, they would be able to sell it off for a profit, for a higher price, whether they realized it or not, that forced the negative interest rates to take place because they didn't care about getting a return on the negative or on the yield. What they cared about was buying this bond and selling it off for a profit. And that's how that ended up occurring like that. Woo, okay. Let's go check out some of these super chats. I'm a little late on this. Okay, Justin, thank you so much for the $5. UE, in your opinion, would national law make profit illegal, effectively turning all business into nonprofit, be a form of communism, or hell? Family's back. Okay. National law making profit illegal. Okay, if you make profit illegal, then what gives you an incentive to do anything? Like, the only reason why people are really enthused to bring production to market is because they think they're going to be rewarded with the ability to move into luxuries. Like, that's how the economy works. You can't like, dude, if I told you, it was just like, dude, I expect you to work real hard all day and not be rewarded for it. Like, you're just going to get rewarded the same. See, here's the thing. Like, if you tell somebody, okay, you can get capped on the limit of profit that you can get, right? Well, then I'm only going to work that hard. Like, that's as far as I'm going to get because I'm not going to work extra hard for something that I don't get reimbursed for. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't make any sense to anybody, right? Where's the incentive? The incentive comes from the ability to profit, and with that profit, you move into luxuries. Now, I understand also that's the exact thing that creates a problem within the economy, but without that ability to move into luxuries, then there is no desire to or ambition or anything to even want to profit. So, yeah, there is no correct way. Like, I don't try and like, I mean, you can try it all you want. You can do what you want with your day, but I personally don't try to take on a strategy of how to make things better. I don't think that's I don't think that's possible. I don't think that's a reasonable expectation, not only from governments, but from employment or anybody who works within the banking systems. The only thing that I put an expectation on is myself, and I try to take as little expectations outside of myself, right? In fact, I try to remove as many expectations outside of myself as I can. And that's, it leaves you in a much better realm. All right. So, I mean, ultimately, no, I don't think it would help. All right. Do it yourself. Create with me. Hey, I like that name. Oops. Oh, shit. I almost deleted your comment. Sorry about that. I accidentally do that. I don't know how. Okay. Can you talk about the paint industry during bad economy, if you know anything about it, since you're familiar with the construction industry in the Pacific Northwest? Wow. Well, that's pretty interesting that you brought it up, because you're probably wondering why the hell the paint prices moved up as high as they did. I mean, that's probably one of the questions out there. Just like anything, we had supply chain breakdowns in everything out there because everybody was told to stay home, right? Don't go to work, don't manufacture, don't distribute, don't do all the stuff that you would typically do to cause the economy to continue to function the way it does, right? Now, when it came to like things like the paint industry, when it came to manufacturing of like all kinds of stuff, like another one was PVC, like chemical. There was resins that were missing that they couldn't get distributed to even produce the products. Like, there was particular ingredients that were failed to be produced and distributed in order to make the other products that were out there. And paint was one of those things, right? Now, something I found very interesting, I want to tell this story about paint and we'll kind of move on. But this is something that I found very interesting about paint, is that a lot of people don't realize it, but there is very few paint manufacturers in this country. Right, most of the paint that people use comes under just a handful of manufacturers, but they have lots and lots of different names. Right, lots of different names that they use. They have storefront names. They have names that they use inside of hardware stores or something like distribution retail outlets. but they're all under the same manufacturer. And this is what's kind of weird about the whole thing, right? So when you see that they're all under the same manufacturer, and then you have people like going, oh, well, this paint's better than that paint. And they're like, okay, well, they're all made by the same dude. But yeah, okay, I get that. Like, they are different formulas, and, there's different things, different aspects about it that can be different. So I totally get why somebody might think this paint is better than that paint, because there is differences. But as far as brand goes, okay, that's kind of funny because they're all made by the same people, right? Or at least in the familiar paints or at least the paints that I'm familiar with. Okay, here we go. We had a particular label, right? This brand name, even though it's under the same manufacturers as this brand name, but they are two different brands, right? Like completely different brands, different advertisement, different colors, different everything, right? Completely different brands. Now, during the pandemic, one of the brands came up in short supply. Very difficult to get the bases, right? So when you're mixing up paint, you have generally you have three different types of base. A base for dark colors, medium colors, light colors, right? So these bases were very difficult to source out. You might get some, but you couldn't get them all. And then if somebody comes in looking for two different colors, and you might not be able to mix up all the colors for them. You'd have to switch brands or something of that nature. And it was very difficult to deal with this one particular brand. Same with the other, but more so on one of them as opposed to the other. So we get completely rid of the one that's worse, right? The one that has less distribution coming to us, and we stick with the other one that's providing better service, right? Better product, or a more consistent product. There we go. All right. Now, something I found very interesting about it is that the first one, when we got rid of it, it finally just disappeared altogether. Like, just completely gone, off the shelf, not to be found anywhere. Nobody could find, that label is just gone. Right? Now, the existing paint, the one that we still carry, and the one that was still there, all of a sudden has a new line of paint that's cheaper than their bottom line paint that they typically would carry, right? Now, this new cheaper paint comes in with a logo on it and a label and a name that is almost, duplicated almost to a T, almost perfectly, as the paint that just got discontinued. Now think about this for just a minute. This other paint over here, who was cheaper, who couldn't get distributed, right, ended up falling away, completely gone. This other company, right, totally different brand name, picks up that logo and starts selling a cheaper brand of paint. So all this paint moved up in price, but yet here they come in with a new product that's cheaper and more economical, and not necessarily back down to what the old prices were, but far better than what the current prices are. So yeah, interesting. Everything, and I'm seeing that in a lot of products out there as well. Thank you very much for that super chat. I really appreciate it. Do it yourself. Create with me. DIY create with me. All right. Cruise on down here to the bottom. Wow. Look at all these comments. Okay. I've been here 51 years. I know what I'm talking about. Oh, Dillard, dang it. You caught me. I didn't mean to read your comment. Hey, forget I just said that. Okay. All right. 10% interest rate. Simon, what do you think the world looks like under those circumstances and under that scenario? Are you talking about this thing? This was just for explanations. I mean, it's not a matter, I don't care. It doesn't matter where interest rates are, right? It matters what is possible out there for the Federal Reserve to do in order to stimulate the economy if they were to lower interest rates. And seeing as how the neutral interest rate is very close to zero, dropping of interest rate is not an effective tool. So what would 10% interest rates be like? It would be in relation to the neutral interest rate, which would be incredibly restrictive to the economy, right? However, if we keep interest rates elevated for a significant amount of time and we continue to raise the neutral interest rate and we have a return on capital investment that then becomes positive for the economy out there, and we have enough people who are getting a return on their capital investment to then actually return that back into the economy, we may find where not only interest rates can stay elevated but then increase from here and not necessarily have a dramatic increase in the inflationary scenario that a lot of people would anticipate would be the reasons for a rising of interest rates. Like, I don't know if you all caught that, but if you can get a return on your money that is going to be positive beyond that of the inflation that we are experiencing, then that return on your money would actually be a stimulation to the economy with elevated interest rates. All right. Okay. Inflation problem would probably get better if rates were 10%. And you do realize the inflation problem was the inflation expectation that was persistently too low. That's the problem, right? The neutral interest rate was too low, and it was too low because of an inflation expectation that was too low. Listen to this. Today we face an altogether different set of problems stemming from a very low neutral interest rate. That is, the short-term real interest rate consistent with an economy operating at its potential alongside low and stable inflation. Ironically, the problem we need to solve these days is the risk of inflation that is persistently too low rather than too high. The problem they need to solve is an inflation expectation, right? The problem they need to solve is the risk of inflation that is persistently too low rather than too high. So the problem they need to solve was to have an inflation that is too high, not too low. They need it to be too high. And that's what's scary about this whole thing, is that nobody realizes this, you know? And then once you understand the monetary policy coming from the Federal Reserve and the fashion of the low neutral interest rate and how it is that they are going to try and stimulate the economy with the actual use of like the media and the narrative and the idea of lowering interest rates, once you see this, like, you get it. Like, it's just like, once you see it, you can't unsee it, you know? But it's very difficult to break free from the common narrative, the thing that has like pretty much been beaten into you from your entire life. This whole concept of the credible threat theory of the monetary policy from the low neutral interest rate world, this is not something that is communicated, like, at all, you know? And so, like, you have to, like, I don't know how else to explain it, but if you are looking for evidence of it being talked about in the mainstream media by anybody else out there, you're not going to find it. You have to go look it out, go search it out for yourself. Now, I don't know how it is that I was able to do this or why I even did it. Like, I don't even know why. You know, it's like, other than being able to come out here and make videos on it, being able to communicate this to you and being able to do it in a way that I know is not being done anywhere else on the internet is a very unique thing. And I'm thankful to you guys for giving me the ability to do it, to be able to have searched this stuff out, because I know that with this information, I'm going to be able to make decisions that are far different from everybody else who's thinking that they're going for some 2% target. Yeah. All right, we got another one here. Stay curious, $2. Simon, will you be in your car in Florida? I won't be. No, we're flying in on Friday, hanging out for a little while, and taking off Sunday. We won't be around very long. Simon, there was a narrative a while back that big banks, e.g. JP Morgan, etc., were swallowing up and acquiring small banks. Did you hear any update on that? Is this process related to central bank digital currencies? I don't think it's necessarily related to central bank digital currencies, because this has been a growing thing. Well, I mean, I guess a shrinking thing, like the amount of banks out there. Anyhow, if you go and look at like bank acquisitions, I think if you just type that into the Google search and put the FRED, like FRED for the Federal Reserve Educational Department part of like, sorry, they put like all kinds of charts together, right? So the Federal Reserve, if you type in just about any statistic you want, like if you want to know what the Fed funds are, if you want to know what mortgage rates, you want to know what like the building permits, type in just about any statistic you want and type in FRED, Fred, behind it, and you'll generally get a chart on something of that nature. Now, if you go and you type like bank acquisitions in that in, you are going to find that like the amount of bank acquisitions that have taken place or the amount of regional banks that are out there is starting to shrink. These banks are being gobbled up, right? And they are. It's just like they're all being eventually, like if it continues on in this fashion, what you are essentially going to find is just like a handful of regional banks out there. And you can almost see this taking place when you think about like the need for your local bank. I mean, do you even really have a need for one? Like, I use my local bank because I like going in there and, doing business face to face just because it's fun, like, I mean, that's the way I do it. So I like going in and I'll put my paycheck in there and just hand it over and stuff like that, as opposed to doing direct deposit or, even taking a picture and depositing it. I can do all those things, but I just choose to walk in, right? But I don't need to. And that's the whole point of it, is that without the need for a bank, you can use pretty much any kind of like banking app and do the same thing, use ATMs to get cash. There is no real need for a bank, and the less need for 'em means that they're probably going to end up becoming you know more acquired by the bigger regional banks, and then you'll end up just doing business with them. And if you kind of look at like how this banking system is working, it seems to be leading in that direction. Now, is it part of like the central bank digital currency part of things? I don't think that's necessarily part of it, because this is something that's been taking place for quite some time. My sister. Anyway, this has been something that's been taking place for quite some time, as these banks have been essentially, been consolidating into the regional banks. Um, in the end, with a digital currency, and I'm assuming it's probably going to be more stable coins, then again, like you won't really need like a facility to go to. Like everything will be done online, and what's the need of banks if you don't need to go anywhere? All right, or what's the need of like a community bank, I guess. Okay. And there is, I shouldn't say that, because there is a need for community banks when you think about it from the financial system, is that not all banks conduct business the same way. Like, some banks might understand how it is that they need to loan to like farmers, right? And like if farmers need loans, it's not necessarily like going to be an easy practice for the banker if they don't understand farming, or at least the agricultural financial industry. And it wouldn't be that easy for the farmer if they don't understand like, the business of, somebody who deals in something that's not farms, right? Dealing with business loans of like, car manufacturers or something like that. It's just like these are not the same people who work together. So there is a need for particular banking styles for the different regions that are out there, for the different types of loans that would occur for those particular businesses. And I could see where there would be unique purpose for particular banks, right? Like they can't all just be under one bank, because like one bank can't understand the needs of everybody out there. And that's where these regional banks make more sense, because they do understand the needs. Does that kind of make sense? Wow, 440 people still watching. I'm loving this, man. You guys must be enjoying the show. We are an hour and 8 minutes into it. We got 251 people with that like button. Thank you so much for hitting that. $17 in super chats, because you guys are always so generous with the super chats. I always appreciate that. Thank you very much. All right, let's see here. Why do you work so hard, my guy? Why? Okay, well, why do I work so hard? Um, Well, what else are you going to do, right? I mean, there was a time in my life where I didn't work that hard all the time, and I wasn't necessarily doing things that were chasing excellence, but chasing a lot of pleasure. And when you kind of screw off for a long time doing that, you got a lot of ground to make up for, right? So I don't have to do this, but I'm choosing to, right? Because I need to make up not only for that lost time, but I also find that it's good for me. And, this is what we do, and we chase the excellence. Okay. Money or luxuries make you work hard. Yeah, I can believe that. This current trajectory is not good. I agree. I don't think it's good at all. How do you work so hard? I got enough energy to get by, no extra. Yeah, I don't know. This is like I don't know. For a lot of people out there, I guess they're probably not that like one of the things that I like come close to is failure, right? Like I've come really close to it. And I know what I was doing that was getting me close to that. So I don't do that anymore. I do the opposite of that kind of thing. And that's really where I think probably my motivation comes from, is not so much as the pursuit of succeeding, which, is neither here nor there to me really in the long scheme of things, because I already feel like I'm about as successful as I ever wanted to ever be at what I was attempting to do, because I really wasn't attempting to do anything. I was just like literally just coming out to have fun and spread some information and kind of share my ideas and maybe have a conversation. And once it started making money, I didn't really think even about making money. Like my whole goal was to earn $100 because that was the threshold for Google to send it to you. So after that, I was just like, man, this is all just, I don't even know. Like I didn't even know what to do after that. It was just like I was just going for it. All right. Expectations of silver price. My expectations of silver are very low. So that's not like a question you would really want me to like answer if you want me to like give you something that's going to go to like $500 or $1,000 or something. Because I really don't think much about it. I don't think about where it's going to go or why it would go that far or anything else like that. The only thing I think about when it comes to silver is how many ounces do I have. That's it. Like how many ounces do I have and how many can I get? That's it. I don't think about the price of it. I don't think about anything else. That's it. Just how many can I get? Because to me it's more of an insurance policy than anything else. And unless I need it for emergency purposes or banking collapse or, just being out of that third party claim for whatever reason, to have that insurance policy is my goal with silver, not to necessarily make a bunch of money. So where the price is really inconsequential. It doesn't mean anything. Not to me anyhow. And like I shouldn't say that, because if it does go to $500 an ounce, I'll probably sell a bunch of it, But I don't have expectations of that. All right. Work isn't a curse. No, it's not. It's not. Work is not a curse. Many don't realize work is a curse. No, work isn't a curse. Work is fun. Work is enjoyable. Work is something that is like driven in each and every single person. Like, I mean, people work hard at the gym. People work hard at, developing new recipes to cook. People work hard at coming up with ideas for videos. People work hard, right? They like it. They enjoy it. It's not a curse. It's fun, right? What's a curse is having to work. That's the difference, right? Getting to work is fun. Having to work is a curse. So there is a difference inside of that. And now most people don't realize that it's the meaning that they're giving it. Having to work and getting to work. It's literally your mindset. There is no difference. There is like every day you show up to the same job. It is your decision to say, I have to be here or I get to be here. And depending on which one of those things you are telling yourself while you are at that job makes all the difference in the world. It's one of the reasons why I wanted, like, people are like, man, you should be doing so much more with your YouTube channel. You should be making all this money. You should be doing. And I'm thinking, no, man. Like, I didn't want to do this for that reason. If I was doing it for money, then it would never have worked. I wasn't trying to do it for money. I was doing it for fun. I was doing it to try and learn. I was doing it for a reason that was not monetary, right? It turned out to be a very lucrative thing for me. It turned out to be very successful in the monetary fashion, but it wasn't what I was going for. I mean, yeah, when I saw that it was available there, I did the things I needed to do in order to make it happen, but it wasn't my intent. It was never my intent. It's still never my intent. Like, if I was intending on doing, I would have been doing sponsorships every video and actually making money and actually retiring early, you know, instead of going to work every day like everybody else does. All right, moving on. I feel myself working so my boss can afford more luxuries. That's the way I feel too at times. All right, maybe in the 80s you could bust your tail and save up for a down payment and a reasonable mortgage payment. Now you're expected to work like a dog for nothing. No, you're not expected to work like a dog for nothing. That is the situation in which that has taken place. Now, the problem is that there was a time in our lives, not in our lives, there was a time in the Americans' lives in the past in which that things like a regular average job was enough, right? It's not enough anymore, but it's not because they did anything, right? It's understanding the Cantillon effect. Understanding that there was a time when this nation was a manufacturing powerhouse. We produced the world's coolest, best, wonderful things, and we sold it to the world, and the world sent us their gold. What do you think we were going to do with it? I mean, if we were smart, which isn't smart, it's just human nature, but if we were smart about it, which I don't even know why I'm using that term, we would not have moved into luxuries. However, human nature says very differently. It says, I worked damn hard. I produced wonderful stuff. I sold it off to the rest of the world. The world was appreciative enough of that stuff to send me their gold. Now I have this gold and you're telling me that I can't enjoy it. That's what I'm trying to say, right? And I'm not trying to say this as being like, hey, I understand the economy and this is what you have to do. What I am going to say is that because we want to enjoy it, is the reason that the problems begin. Because what ends up happening is that you raise your standard of living, you will begin to increase your consumption, it will drive the prices up, it will start forcing in foreign production to compete with the domestic manufacturers, who will then begin to leave so long as ever increasing amounts of new money comes into the system. This will not change. I don't care who the political administration, king, queen, ruler, awesome, financial individual who comes into the game. They cannot change that from happening. If you cannot get people to, unless you can get people to change that idea of working hard so that they can buy something luxurious, which is not going to happen, then this whole system will continue to do the thing, right? No poor people offered you 401k. There's people who did all the right things, went to post-secondary, saved and worked up their jobs, and yet they are so far from being able to own a home. Thomas, yes, I know. This is what I'm trying to explain. This is the whole point. This is like 99% of what I do this content for, is for that exact reason. And I'm trying to say that you can't do it that way. Don't expect it. That's an expectation that says, hey, man, I worked hard. I went and did all these things. I got this degree. And you're telling me that I can't go and buy a house now with all this stuff that I expected? Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. Your expectations are too high. They're too externalized. What you have to realize is that there's no way that I can do a 9-to-5 job and expect to save enough money and to buy that house. It ain't going to work like that. What you have to do is you have to work your 9-to-5 job, then you have to go and work another 9-to-5 job someplace else from AM to the PM. You literally have to work 2 full-time jobs. It's a different world. And now if you're not going to work that second job, then you have to go and find some sort of other income. You have to do DoorDash. You have to make YouTube videos. You have to, sell stuff on, the internet. You have to do something. right? You can't just sit there at the bar and think, man, it sucks that I work hard all day, but I can't afford to save up enough to buy a house. Yeah, that sucks. You can't, you're right. You can't do that. You cannot do that because it ain't gonna work. Like there was a time in this country that it did. Like you could talk to some old 90-year-old man and says, "What do you mean I did that?" Yeah, you're right. He did that. Okay, we can't do that. Times have changed. The new money is poured in. The separation between the rich and the poor has grown too much. Houses and leases are proving that there is an abundance of money in the system by the prices of the elevated prices, right? So it's obvious. Like you can't change this. This is what's occurring, right? Understand it. Now that you understand it, do something different. Figure out how to house hack. Figure out how to team up with other people in order to get in that house. Figure out another location that you might be able to find that is unique that nobody else has discovered yet that says, hey man, has my possibilities attached to it. There is possibilities out there. It's to seek them, right? But as far as an environment, an economy that exists out there that says, hey man, a hardworking, average, everyday dude who goes to work every day, who never calls in sick, who saves up as much money as he can, who doesn't move into luxuries, is going to be able to save up and buy a house that doesn't exist, right? That's right. What are you going to do? You're going to have to figure out something different. All right. Thank you so much, Pro Clean Hall. I love it. $5. How will technologies like blockchain and DLT affect Nostro Vostro accounts? What the hell's a Nostro Vostro account? I'm so sorry. I have no idea. That's a Nostro Vostro account. I don't know what that is. Let me cruise down here to the bottom. Maybe somebody explain that to me real quick. All right. What if stable coins were backed by time, all the cost of an hour of labor, and some other time-based factor for control purposes? Well, I think like the whole idea of a digital currency, especially when it comes to like a central bank digital currency type of coin, even if it's a stable coin, that the possibilities of being able to like track, trace, control, limit, force, do all that other stuff, I think all those things are possible. However, if you really want the people to use it, then it can't be a bad currency. Like you're not going to be able to introduce a bad currency. You have to introduce a currency as if it's a good currency, or it has to trade one to one with the dollar itself, meaning that you have to have just as much faith and belief and understanding of it to be one to one with the dollar, saying that I don't see it any different. Now, if it has a time limit to it, if it has a direction limit to it, if it has, track and tracing and all this other stuff that is forcing the people to be like, hey, man, I'm very concerned about this particular currency. Well, that's not one to one, right? Then it won't work. People will reject it and the dollar will be used, right? They'll just simply reject it. The introduction of stable coins is the idea that nobody will know the difference. And that's the point of it, is that like I think about the same way that dollar was able to take over as the world reserve currency when gold was the main form of currency for world transactions. People literally thought by having a certain amount of dollars that they would be able to get a fixed amount of gold. There was no difference. These things were trading one to one as if they were equal, very much like a stable coin would do. That's the transition in which it would take. So they can't limit this stuff in the beginning, right? They can now after time, after all the dollars are out of it and everybody's using stablecoin. Now they can start turning the screws, right? But until then, they can't do that because the people would simply just reject it. They gotta have like it has to be one to one, and people would have to have belief and faith and confidence, right? Is the international banking thing. Okay, I'm sorry, I get you. Um, Let's go back up and read that comment again. All right. How will technologies like blockchain and DLT affect Nostro Vostro accounts? Um, you know, outside. Okay, so outside of, say, the speed of the transaction, what is it that anything would do that the dollar can't? Like that's the question that I would have to ask anybody when it comes to like not only XRP but the SWIFT, but the the system that the Russian and China are setting up, all the other systems that are out there. When I think about like what it is that people are saying, though, this is going to compete, I'm thinking, what is it that they're going to do that's going to be any different from what it is that the dollar is doing, right? Other than that, possibly like the speed of transactions that are happening with it. Now, I agree that there are technologies that can speed that up, but I don't believe it's out of the realms of possibilities that the Federal Reserve within the dollar system that we have now could have a system that would be just as speedy. Right? So really what it comes down to is understanding why it is that the dollar is the world reserve currency to begin with. Right? And whether or not it's being done through distributed ledger technologies, whether it's being done through old antiquated systems of like, whatever we're using today, it doesn't necessarily negate the fact that there is a position being held by the dollar that nothing else can really do, right? Even if we wanted to use something else, we can't. There's this, it doesn't exist. And that's the point of it. Like if you had any other item, I don't care if it's Bitcoin or gold or any item, especially if it's a fixed item, right? Like there's only so much supply of it. What will end up happening is that the most industrious nation will take possession of all that currency, depriving the rest of the world of the ability to do transactions, and they will fall into depression and misery. Okay? That's what will happen if you have a fixed currency, if there's only a limited supply of currency. Now, if you have any other type of currency out there, it now comes down to a trust factor. And that trust is a very, very prestigious position to hold because not very many people will actually be able to acquire the trust spontaneously, right? Like to say, hey man, trust me, whatever. Okay. It doesn't quite work like that. The only reason why the dollar is even in the position that it is because people trusted gold. That's why. Now, understanding that there was a moment in which that people really, truly, honestly, and thought that they were going to be able to trade their dollars over for gold. Now, there was a lot of people out there going, BS, not going to happen. Don't trust it, right? But most people around the world said, hey, you know what? If we didn't have the dollars, we really wouldn't be able to do transactions. So I want to do transactions, right? And I'm going to do this. And that's what most people thought because they can trade their dollars in for gold. Now, understanding that part of it, the dollars were printed up by far too much. And people realized that. But by that time, it was too late. Now, that trickery that was happening, right? That trickery in which that people say was done purposefully by powerful men and New World Order type of agents, I can totally see it. Like somebody had to know what was happening. Right? Somebody had to know that, like, they were like, dude, do you see what's going on here, man? All right. So somebody had to know that was happening. However, it was happening, and that's what took place. And so when the dollar all of a sudden became the world reserve currency because they severed it from the gold standard and there was really nothing else out there except for the dollar. And now the trust for the dollar wasn't exactly, held in high regards when this took place. Like people were like, piss on you, man, we're out. All right, that's literally what they thought, and there was a lot of instability taking place. It wasn't like all of a sudden the dollar was just like instantaneously the king of the world and we're awesome. Like no, there was a lot of hard times. In fact, we brought it up here many times. The Carter administration was suffering with the idea that nobody wanted to buy the bonds. They were selling them off, and they were selling bonds that were due in German marks and Swiss francs. This was the United States selling bonds due in a foreign currency, right? Because that's how they got the best interest rates at the time. So the United States wasn't doing well at that time, but the establishment of the world reserve currency had already taken place by that trade-off between, a fixed amount of dollars for a certain amount of gold. Once that had taken place, so everybody else was like, man, there's other currencies, but nothing quite like the dollar. It runs up to 15%. We're trying to fight inflation, and all of a sudden everybody's looking at the dollar going, man, makes high interest payments. The treasury's looking pretty good. We're doing all these world transactions with it. There it is, right? So how does that position gets knocked off, right? How do you remove that from that? You really can't, right? It has to fail. It has to fail completely. And that's not an easy thing to happen. All right. How many animals you hunt in your hood? There's deer and elk and, well, I mean, I guess, the river's not too far, so you can hunt duck. So, there's three animals. Now, I personally don't hunt. I raise animals. I'll raise and butcher chickens or something like that, but I don't really go hunting much anymore. I kind of gave that up a long time ago. All right, if you trust your money in the bank, I got some swap land in Florida I want to sell you. Hey, Brady, that's a great statement, man. In fact, that's really good because, understanding it from this level is really important because I've been asked that question many times. In fact, I was asked that question years ago before we had the issues with the Silicon Valley banking crisis and the asset failures that were, the failure to sell assets at a reasonable price that had occurred. Now, this is when, prior to this, people were asking me, aren't you concerned about keeping your money in the bank? And I said, no, but I probably should be, but I'm not. And the reason why I'm not is because not only does everybody see that there is a liquidity issue coming to the banking system, the Federal Reserve sees it as well. Now, I don't mean to give the Federal Reserve some sort of like awesome credit because, they know what they're doing or anything like that. But here's the deal. Like, if we can sit around discussing how it is that the banks are going to fail and there's going to be like a liquidity issue within them and depositors aren't going to get paid and you better get your bank out of or cash out of the bank now, and we can have all this discussion about it, do you think that maybe possibly it just might be occurring at the Federal Reserve too? I mean, you think? Like, they're sitting around going, everything's fine, we're cool, no worries. What is that guy saying on YouTube? Nah, right? Of course they're thinking about it. Of course they know. And that's why when they ask me, are you worried about keeping your money in the bank? No, but I probably should be because, yes, there is reason to be concerned. Very much legitimate to all the things that everybody was saying, including all the people on YouTube, right? All those internet economists. All of it was very factual in what they were saying and probably reasonable for their warnings. But what they were not talking about is that the Federal Reserve also was talking about it and how they were going to be using tools that are not known to anybody out there. They were going to deploy these in unusual and exigent circumstances. And because they had these lifeboats and they talked about them, not necessarily in specifics, but in general, that they had these ideas, out there, I knew that there wasn't going to be a failure of the banking system because they talked about their concerns prior to it. So now here's the thing. They can't come here. They're not going to come out and tell you about those safety boats, right? They're not going to tell you about the lifeboats. They're not going to tell you about the tools that they have for unusual and exigent circumstances. They'll never tell you about this. And the reason why they won't tell you is because you would start to price that in. The markets would price those tools and those concepts into their investments, into the prices, knowing that the Federal Reserve would have this thing that they could deploy. So they do not tell you about it. They do not give any mention to it anywhere. Not in any document we're ever going to see. They plan those things for the unusual and exigent circumstances, but they do not talk about the unusual and exigent circumstance tools. They do not give us that information. Because if we had that information, we would price that in. You see? And so I know they exist, but I don't know what they are, and I don't know what level, right? And that's the point about it is like it doesn't, again, it's like more about understanding what the Federal Reserve, what they have available to them and how they communicate that is more important than the actual actions. Okay, so sorry. I have to skip over lots of comments here, guys, in order to keep up to date here. All right. Yeah, that always shocked me, especially these days. How do you kick an 18-year-old and expect them to prosper? I don't know. The day I graduated high school, I moved out. Like, my wife and I were working part-time jobs in high school, saving up our money, rented an apartment, she had moved into that apartment while still in high school and working a part-time job because her mom left the state, right? And the day I graduated, I moved in with her. Now, that was in 1995. I can't imagine a whole lot of people doing that today. Like, that would be probably a pretty far off concept. We don't have college degrees, right? We barely graduated high school. I mean, she's a lot smarter than I was, especially when it came to high school. But we both got our diplomas, but we didn't have anything special going on. We were working part-time jobs that we went full-time on when we graduated high school, but they were still the high school jobs that we had, right? So, and that's the life that we started in and moved on from there, right? So, not easy. And I can't imagine anybody really doing it today. So, the only thing that I would say is that not only can they have the full-time job, but then they can do DoorDash and they can do internet sales and they can do all kinds of other stuff that wasn't available to me back in the day. Like, if I wanted extra money, I had to go on my days off and go mow lawns. I had to go find construction jobs to do. I couldn't go online. I couldn't go make a video. I couldn't sell something on the internet. I probably could have if I knew what I was doing back then, because the internet was just in its infancy then. All right, C. Ripple. The opportunities are everywhere. Yeah, there are opportunities everywhere. Yes, there are. All right. It crashes for the individual personal crisis while gaslighting in the news and media permits the status quo and wealth transfer to the top to continue unhindered. They won't official announce a crash. Yeah. Like, I mean, do you think it's being done on purpose? As you think about it, if the money wasn't funneling to the top, how would the money get in? Like, if the money, if like, how do you expect the new money to come into the system if it didn't come in through the debt issuance, right? I mean, it comes in through debt issuance, and it comes in through people borrowing money. The people who borrow the money first are the people who have first access to the money. The people who have first access to the money get to spend it at face value, and generally those people who get to spend it at face value are the people who are at the top, right? And the more that this happens, the more separation between the rich and the poor take place. So when you say it's funneling it up to the top, I disagree. I think it's starting at the top, and it funnels down and trickles down and lands at everybody else who is competing to try and survive every single day. Like, it's just the reality of the situation. It's not one that can change. If you want to change this, this is the problem. If you want to change this, you're going to have to tell people they can no longer move into luxuries. They're going to have to work twice as hard, pay back all their debts, continue doing this for generations, never buy anything new, repair everything, only buy the bare necessities, eat as little as possible, suffer under these circumstances and this condition for years. Not even years, generations. It would probably take more than one generation to do this, because it took more than one generation to create the problem. So, you want to complain. I mean, I'm not saying that you're complaining, but if there's a complaint about how the money funnels to the rich, or how our system is set up to separate the rich from the poor, it's not set up that way. It is that way. It's just that way. It's been that way for hundreds of years. There's no difference in the way that the separation happens. It happens from new money coming in and people moving into luxuries. It's just there's very little doubt in my mind. So take it for what it is, but I mean, there's no changing it. He's just got to figure out how to deal with it. All right. Wow, he just described my life perfectly. I love shopping at the Dollar Tree. Here now. All right. Do what Jesus told the rich guy, sell everything and give it to the poor. Poor can't play the rich man's game when their bills leaves them with $30 after their bills are paid. Thomas, just two ways to wealth, right? Earn more or require less. That's it. That's the only way to do it, right? Now, here's something funny about wealth. Wealth is food, conveniences, and pleasures of life. That's it. There's nothing else. Food, conveniences, and pleasures of life. Now, if you can figure out your food situation, right? Now, if that's tough, like I understand for a lot of people, especially if you live in the city, like it gets really tough. But food is actually pretty easy. Like here in the Pacific Northwest, it's everywhere. Like it's naturally grows and runs around everywhere. Gardening is a very popular thing to do. People share a lot. It's just an abundant thing to have around here. So figure out your food. If you figure out your food, that's a third of your wealth. All right. Now, what's the next? Conveniences. Well, what's convenient to you, man? I mean, do you have to have a big giant house? Do you have to have a new car? Do you have to have like all the things that people say are necessities in my life, but really they're more conveniences that you're taking into a much higher level than they need to be? I mean, maybe they're not. I'm not trying to say this about personally about you, but if food is taken care of and you take your conveniences down to the bare minimums to drive a very modest car, if a car at all, or just ride a bike, right? Because conveniences are wealth. If you want a nice car, that's it's showing of wealth. But if you don't need it, right, then that's wealth that's automatically brought to you by just not needing it, right? So conveniences. Well, what about the last one? Pleasures of life. Food, conveniences, pleasures of life. Well, what do you find pleasure in, man? I mean, do you find pleasures in spending money, or do you find pleasures in like enjoying a good view with music? Right? Like both of those things you can have for practically free. I know when I lived on my little hobby farm, when I was raising animals in the garden and didn't really have a whole lot for money or income and broken down car and whatever, I did not have a whole lot of money going on, but I had a lot of food. Like, I mean, food was not a concern of mine at all. Like, not at all. Like, we had all kinds of an abundance of all kinds of great food to eat. My neighbor was raising pigs, I was raising chickens, we all had gardens. It was a good time, right? No worries about food. Conveniences? Well, I was on the farm, and so like I had to deal with that. And like as far as conveniences, I mean, in the house, well, maybe I could have used a car, but really like everything on my property, is what I needed. Like that's where I lived. It's just like I didn't need for food and I didn't need to leave, and I had everything kind of there, right? So conveniences were, just kind of subjective to what I needed at the time, right? And then pleasures of life, like I found being there very pleasurable. It was very entertaining. It kept me occupied all day long. Other people were always impressed. Man, you always eat so well. You have some great food here. You have so much fun doing all this stuff. Like I found more wealth when I was broke with no money living on that hobby farm than I did just about any time in my life. Like mentally I wasn't doing well, but when I think about like the food, conveniences, and pleasures of life, I had all that. I had all of it there. And I didn't like really need or want for much else, right? Except for maybe a car to drive around, because that was my major issue back then. So it's just all about, again, about the meaning that you give it. Yeah, it sucks out there, man. Like you can't go and work a job and thinking, okay, man, I'm going to work a job and I'm going to live in this apartment. I'm going to make these car payments. I'm going to save up for a house. I'm going to marry this woman and we're going to have a kids and we're going to all do this with my 9-to-5 job. Like what in the world are you thinking? That's delusional thoughts, man. There's no world existing that's going to happen in. It doesn't work. Like there was a time that would have been it. It would have been exactly the description of the way that you would have conducted yourself in this American world, right? But that's not the way it goes down now. It doesn't go down like that, right? So you have to do something so far off different and changing your strategy around. Just understand that those ideas don't work anymore. All right, you were explaining that we are overpopulated without realizing it. No, I don't think we're overpopulated. All right. Why do you think rate cuts will cause precious metals to go higher? Do I think rate cuts? I mean, generally in this type of situation, the rate cuts are being done because of the fear and uncertainty that has taken place within the markets that would then have people looking for the safe haven. And although typically you would find like the dollar as the safe haven place to be, in an economic uncertainty, there is no safe haven place to go to except for gold, right? This is one of the reasons why I actually think the dollar and gold are going to rise together, is because the uncertainty that's going to be running around the world for the dollar itself will have people going, man, I'm concerned about being in the dollar. And since there is no other place to go to, they'll go into gold. So those two could actually rise together, on that sense. But, yeah. Rate cuts are a sign of a problem. Exactly. In the 80s, Homer Simpson was the archetype average man in America. Today, his average is well beyond the dream of men today. Yeah, isn't that crazy? Same thing with like Married with Children, like Al Bundy. All right. I can build a better truck than Tesla with cardboard. We all brainwashed to a degree, no matter how aware you are, but we can minimize it. Unfortunately, since the younger generation gets caught up in the trend and reputation, they can get away with this. We actually need people to have more kids. Kirk, I totally agree, but here's the problem with it is that you're not going to be able to find a situation in which that you're going to be able to bring more kids into a society that has elevated their standard of living. It doesn't work like that. And in fact, it's not me trying to describe that. It was described right here in Cantillon's essay on economic theory, saying that, in fact, let me see if I can find the spot in it, because really what it comes down to is you don't even have to take the theory or to understand the theory. All you have to do is just look out there into the reality. Lesser Nations who suffer in poverty have more children, right? The nations who suffer with poverty have more children. And the reason is that a higher standard of living means that if you have children, they will have the potential to lessen your standard of living, right? It'll diminish it. And nobody wants to diminish their standard of living. Everybody wants to increase it. However, if you are living in poverty and you have very little in your life, and the thing that is going to lessen, or the only place you can go to in your standard of living, the only lesser you can have in your standard of living is death, then the potential to have children into a standard of living that is better than yours is great, because the only thing that's less than that is death, right? So you can have all the children you want. It doesn't lessen your standard of living. The only way it lessens your standard of living is if you already have an elevated standard of living. Does that make sense? And now, let me see if I can find it here in Cantillon's essay, because he talks about it, and he actually does a pretty good job of describing it too. But I can't remember where it is in this essay. Let me see. Let me see here. I think it was in part 2. Let me see. Barter market capacity inside the increase and decrease of quantity of money. Subject. All right. The variation portions. Shoot. Okay. The increase and decrease of the number of the people in the state chiefly depends on the taste. Okay. Here we go. The amount of people in the state. Let me see where that's at. Page 85. Let me see if I can find this. What does it say here? Okay, population is based on the taste and choices of the property owners. Early versions of the Malthusian approach to population growth that it follows some mathematical formula are criticized. This chapter also shows that the opulence and lavish spending of the prince and absentee landlords living far from their lands was responsible for the poverty and decline in population of France, which ultimately led to the French Revolution. Um, This is actually a really good chapter to read too. I don't know if we should. I don't really want to read through all of it here, but I just like some of the stuff. Like here he goes. An adult man who wears leather shoes, stockings, woolen clothes, who lives in a house and has change of linen and bed chairs, tables, and other necessities, moderately drinks beer and wine, eats meat every day, butter, cheese, bread, vegetables, etc., sufficiently and yet moderately, needs less than the product of 4 or 5 acres of land average quality. It is true that in these estimates no land is allotted for horses except those needed to plow and for the transport of the products in distance of 10 miles. He talks about how far the amount needs. So he's talking about this average man and how much he would need, right? And the product of 4 or 5 acres. Um, History records that first Romans each maintained his family on 2 jornaks of land, equal to 1 Paris acre, approximately 330 square feet. They were almost naked, had no wine or oil, slept in straw, and hardly had any comforts. But because they intensely cultivated the land, which was fairly good around Rome, they drew from it plenty of grains and vegetables. So isn't that crazy? Like they talked about like the lavish life of an individual dude and how much of the production that he took the product of 4 or 5 acres. When in reality, the actual need, right, for Romans maintained his family on approximately, let's see, on 2 jornaks, whatever that is, of land, equal to 1 Paris acre, approximately 330 square feet. Okay? So you think about it, that's not even very much land. 330 square feet, that's what they cultivated to eat. Right? Like, you think like, man, they had all this land and all this, stuff going on. No, man, these people were fighting for survival every single day, cultivating the ground, and that little plot of land is everything that they had in order to try and acquire what it is that they could consume. Because if they didn't do that, they died. Like, that's some shit, right? Oh, I forgot. We were talking about population. I can't remember what I was looking for in here. Uh, oh, here we go. The increase, here, where's my highlighter? The increase in population, here we go. The increase in population can be carried furthest in the countries where the people are content to live the most poorly and consume the least production of the soil. You get that? The increase of population can be carried furthest in countries where the people are content to live the most poorly and to consume the least production of the soil. In countries where all the peasants and laborers are accustomed to eating meat and drink wine, beer, etc., not many inhabitants can be supported. So, right there, he talks about it from a long time ago that when you increase the standard of living, that you are going to have a diminished amount of population. Right? If you have poverty-stricken people, they will have more population. They will increase it. And that's something like, that's what I find very interesting about reading through these old ancient history or this old economic theory is that they describe a lot of the things that people are blaming today on like society or environmental or all kinds of stuff. But if you just look at it, it's probably economic, right? It's probably an economic situation, an economic event that's happening. All right, guys, I'm going to give it like, what time is it? I'm going to give it like 7 more minutes here and then we're going to call it quits. We have been out here for almost 2 hours now. And although I am just absolutely loving this with 419 people watching, 340 likes, it's just incredible. I do have to call it quits at some point. All right. I think it can be turned around. Joshua, I mean, dude, I'm with you, man. I am with you. If you have an idea, if you have a plan, if you have a concept that is going to work, man, I would love to hear the idea behind it. But it has to address some of the situations that I am concerned with, and mainly it's the idea of the new money and the way it comes, and the way it comes in. That money comes into the system and it separates the rich from the poor. It drives out the domestic manufacturing and it drives in foreign production, and there's really no shift to that, right? There are things that can be done. There are government interventions like tariffs and subsidies and things that might help alleviate some of the problems, but it doesn't take away from the economic forces that are at play. I mean, let's do it. Let's do it. But my understanding and the way I know of it is that the pain and suffering that we are going to have to go through to cut back on all the expenses, to cut back on luxuries, to work twice as hard as we normally do, to do nothing but pay off debts and reinvest back into production. And we have to do that for generations. And that is a very painful experience to consciously work towards and to go through. All right. And I just don't see it happening. But I'm on board, man. I'm willing to do it. People do things for economic reasons. Woodrow Wilson lost his re-election, but did not too long after he allowed women to vote. You know that's bad. All right. Is it worth to start a YouTube channel? Absolutely. The novice wanderer. I think everybody should have a YouTube channel. I literally think every single person could be sharing something that they have knowledge in that can be shared and valued by other people out there, and by explaining or sharing or just teaching or whatever it is that you have within you that is a passion that you can share with other people and express to other people, you are going to find that there is people out there who relate to you differently than anybody else out there. And even if you're sharing the same information that somebody else is sharing out there, the way you are sharing it is being received in a way that they don't want from other people. They want it from you, right? That's important to understand. Like, I'm sitting here in a subculture that is completely saturated with high-ranking people who really understand like what it is to be an investor and making money and have hundreds of millions of dollars and all kinds of stuff. And I'm not one of those dudes, but yet I'm sitting out here in that community doing it, right? Because the information that I share is being received in a way that is different from what those other guys can share. Right? And you just have to know that you can do that too with whatever it is you're doing. Mine would be art. Do it, dude. Go for it. All right. I was raised in the foster system, had a minimum wage job, retired at 55, so I saw BS and AAA. All right. I think we'll need another crisis to usher in the next phase of the cycle. Minimum wage should go up. I think they should abolish minimum wage. All right, I'm going to say a quick one here because I got just a few minutes left. Minimum wage should be abolished because what a minimum wage is saying is that if you are not smart enough to produce something for your boss that is worth at least a certain amount, then you are too stupid to work in our country. You can't work in our country if you are not smart enough to at least be able to produce something for your boss of at least a minimum of a certain standard, right? There are some people out there who are not going to be able to do that. They are not smart enough, they are not talented enough, they are not skilled enough to be able to produce something for their boss to equal the minimum wage. They might only be able to sweep a parking lot, and that's it. Like, that is literally the entire, like, they don't have the mental capacity or even the patience to do anything else other than push a broom, right? Because they have been so mentally deteriorated their entire life, right? It's not their fault, but because they have been put in that position, they are not smart enough to now work in this country. But if you abolish the minimum wage, right, and say, okay, man, you can just work for whatever you want, then there might be people out there who would take enough consideration to say, okay, man, listen, you're on the street, you're not doing well, you're not mentally healthy, and I don't want you around any of my customers. But if you want to sweep this parking lot and don't talk to anybody and just push all the crap and everything to the very end of it, I'll give you $20. Isn't that fair? Right? And if you do it again tomorrow, we might be able to make this a consistent thing, right? Like, that's the way that these things work, right? That's the way the jobs work. But you're not allowed to do that. You can't do that in this country. All right, we got 1 minute left. What's the next question? All right, double bacon, mushroom, cheese. Oh, yeah. Dude, man, I can smell like a barbecue going off right now, man. And that, like, that's doing it. All right, actually, the more I think about it, he's right. All right, minimum wage is capital control. Capital control is never good. Absolutely, all-nighter. I totally agree. I'm not old enough for the... All right, Simon, what do you think about California raising the minimum wage to $20 an hour and the mass layoffs? Exactly what I just said. You know, I mean, here's the thing. They if you want inflation to come down, they have to cause unemployment to rise. Isn't that scary? So, like, you know, layoffs and everything else, like, everybody's, oh, no, the government has to do something about it. Like, what? Like, they employed the Federal Reserve to do something about inflation, to keep inflation low and stable. Well, if you have a job, then guess what? You're forcing the inflation up. So, unemployment needs to rise. Like, I'm not saying that. The Fed's saying that. I'm not even saying the Fed's saying that. The Fed's is like, you know, they're just jabbering off a bunch of stuff to hoping that you would participate in the economy in the fashion that they think you will, since the adjustment of interest rates ain't going to do anything anymore, you know. But as long as everybody's like, as long as unemployment stays low, I can't imagine inflation coming down. All right. You're the best, Simon. Thank you. Well, thank you, Brody, for being here. Jerome Powell promised pain. He did say it. If everyone stopped buying things, we would get deflation. Classic retirement of the three-legged stool, Social Security, pensions, 401k, boomers, and early to mid-stage Generation Xers if you're lucky. Alrighty, guys, this was a lot of fun. Thank you all for being here. We got 377 people watching with 366 likes. Thank you so much for hitting that like button. So we had close and over 500 people at some point. Man, that was incredible. Thank you so much for so many people joining in on the live stream. I was kind of taken back by that, by seeing so many people, but that is so cool. Thank you for being here. What else can I say? Uneducated Economist. You guys let me know.